This is episode 1175.
I would say before, historically, when I first came into the role, when we talked about kind of our cash flow management, our forecasting, hey, what does the burn look like coming up? The answer was always consistently, hey, we're going to have to wait till the month closes. I'm going to have to be able to generate you a report to tell you what we spent, what the P&L hit was, and then potentially give us an outlook in terms of how that will forecast into our cash flow. So we really flip that in terms of when we actually do that analysis and insight. So we utilize our tool to kind of do a lot of our cash flow planning or capital planning, looking at what is being requested across the organization, looking at what are some of the road spend that ultimately isn't necessarily within budget, and then being able to marry that data using AI and forecasting tools to be able to give me a more accurate reflection of cash flow.
What happens when the numbers are right, but the decision still feels wrong? In today's finance function, data has never been more abundant, more real-time, or more precise. And yet the most important calls inside the C-suite rarely come down to numbers alone. They hinge on something harder to quantify: judgment. Our guest today has seen this shift up close, where financial leadership moves beyond reporting into influence, where storytelling can shape outcomes, and where challenging assumptions can change the course of a deal. This is a conversation about what really separates finance leaders today and why the edge may no longer be technical at all. Our talk with CFO Amy Wang begins after this. Wouldn't you rather be doing literally anything else besides chasing invoices? Golfing, reading, staring at a wall, all great options. Well, here's the good news. There's a tool that could be live in your systems this week that does your entire accounts receivable process for you. This week, not next quarter, not after 6-month implementation where your vendor support team is ghosting you. This week, Stu handles your entire order-to-cash cycle collections, cash application, disputes, deductions. One AI agent that does the work, learns your customers, and collects your cash. You just set the policy. But wait, there's more. I've always wanted to say that on this show. With over $1 billion collected to date, Bishop Lifting cut overdue invoices by 35% and freed up millions in working capital. And they actually stick around to make sure it works, which, if you've ever implemented enterprise software before, you know that alone is worth the price of admission. Stute.ai. STUUT.ai. Tell them that Jack sent you. Ridiculously easy, ridiculously fast. Go do something better with your Tuesday. Operators are standing by. Well, one operator. It's the agent. It doesn't sleep. Hello, CFO Amy Wang is with us. Her finance journey began at PwC, where she built a strong technical foundation before moving into high-growth environments at Solium. There she advanced through roles just as the company navigated its acquisition by Morgan Stanley, gaining firsthand experience in scale, integration, and evolving expectations. She later stepped into CFO roles at Userful and now Procurify, where she helps guide a spend management platform serving modern finance teams. Amy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jack. I'm excited about the conversation we're about to have.
So take us back in time and share with us some of those experiences you feel prepared you for the role.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it was very interesting. You kind of listing out my career. So I think when you look at it on paper, that very much sounds like a traditional path, from,
Yeah.
audit to
Yep.
controllership over to that first CFO role. But I think when I look back, at the moments that really did shape me as a finance leader, I do think it had very little to do with the path or the progression itself. My first, I would say, finance mentor wasn't, it wasn't a partner at PwC, wasn't executive or another CFO. It was really my mother. So I grew up in China. So at a very young age, I lived in a system and a culture that very much favored boys over girls. If there's anything I can tell you about my mom, it is she is a firecracker. So she's a very stubborn lady. But ever since I could remember, ever since I was walking, she had really instilled in me this importance of independence and financial freedom. So obviously as a kid, you don't really appreciate that at the time. But when I look back, I think that's the value that's really shaped me into the kind of finance leader I am today. So I'm really grateful for that. But in terms of pivotal moments within my career, I think the first one really came when I did have that front row seat to what was slated to be. So I'm based out of Calgary. I worked for a company called Solium. And we had received an offer to be acquired by Morgan Stanley. So it was going to be Calgary's first unicorn, and that was a big deal at the time. So I went into that deal, some of those negotiations, thinking that we would ultimately live or die by the numbers. And that is typical accounting thinking, finance thinking, if you will. But really what I got to witness, what I got to participate in is the numbers, evaluations, all those initial discussions, those are just table stakes. Everyone can read a spreadsheet. Everyone there is well versed in terms of what's happening. But in terms of what really actually moved the needle on the deal itself, some of the negotiations that happened behind the scenes was the story we were able to articulate behind the number. So that storytelling, that was my first encounter with how critical that needed to be and how tight that needed to be. As part of the full process, we really had to walk through the strategy, talk through about the intentional acquisitions in terms of private market acquisitions we had made. And then ultimately how we had been successful in integrating the people and the processes after the fact, and ultimately translate that all into a very compelling financial narrative. And that was really the bread and butter of that acquisition in terms of what Morgan Stanley was buying us for. And so that experience in itself has really fundamentally changed how I think about what finance is actually for. Having a seat at that table and bringing value to the organization, not just from a reporting lens, not someone after the fact, but really driving value and creating value creation for the organization. And then I would say the last, not the last, but another one that really resonates with me in terms of my career overall was really that first CFO role. So my first CFO role at Userful. I think no one really ever prepares you for that first CFO role. I think you can talk about, there's no playbook that tells you what you're going to encounter, what the problems are, what the issues are. Something I think no one really prepared me for, and something I really truly started to understand as I really dove into that role was how lonely it can be at the top. It was the first time I wasn't just advising on some of the decisions that are being made. It wasn't essentially a project I was delivering. I had to own all the big decisions, and you feel that pressure, but you also see the results immediately. So whether they're good, they're bad, I had to own them through and through. So that was one where it really taught me that the relationship between a CFO and CEO is very critical at a company at any stage. So when you do get that partnership right, I think that's where you're ultimately able to move fast, make the right decisions, but also take on risks that make sense at the time. So when you have that effective partnership, I really do think that's where a business comes to life. So I guess laddering back to kind of what we talked about, it definitely looks like I've had a very linear path in terms of my career progression. But for me, I think the real education was learning finance leadership wasn't all about the numbers. It was about that independence early on, sharing insights and really having that courage to own a lot of the decisions that followed along my career.
It sounds like such an interesting moment in time for you when the Morgan Stanley acquisition happens. Again, up to that point in time, just the way you expressed it, you were more of a controller mindset. The narrative hadn't come to play a central role in your finance career. Were you invited into a boardroom one day to be briefed on what was happening? Was that your first blush of it? Can you take us back in time?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it definitely wasn't just a point in time. It was accumulation of all the things I had done up to that point in time. So I think part of it is I always try to put my best foot forward. I put in a lot of effort. I try to get everything done. I try to be the person that knows everything and knows the numbers inside and out. That was kind of just how I was brought up. I really focused on precision. But as part of my controllership role, and as I branched out and moved into the VP finance role, a big part of it was really understanding the operations, the backbones of the business, really understanding the why behind what we were doing, and not just reflecting on the numbers or analyzing the numbers. It was, why did we intentionally make that acquisition of this small company out in San Francisco? It was all as part of our strategy in terms of building out our private market space. And that was the area that really attracted the wealth management investments through Morgan Stanley. Mm-hmm. And so I think the more I said yes to opportunities and conversations with the broader organization, that really built the foundation for me to speak confidently with the investors and as part of that deal cycle. But I was ultimately involved in that deal team day one. And I think with the knowledge I had, the understanding and the depth of which, putting it all together for the investors and for Morgan Stanley when we were doing that deal, they were able to really understand the value I was providing there.
Could you tell us, and again, you're stepping from, as you described it, a rather small company into the Morgan Stanley world. No challenges there for you? Again, I know you were at PwC, but still a cultural change, perhaps.
Yes, I think definitely a culture shock, and that's something I don't think gets talked about enough when we look at M&A activity, or when you get bought, or when you fold into a much larger organization. I think Solium was a publicly traded company. We had over, I think, 800 employees at the time, but you're going from 800 to effectively a 60,000 organization. And so it was really interesting in terms of how we were trying to preserve that culture, that Solium. We took a long time to really build that culture, right? We invested heavily in our people, and that was something we wanted to make sure came across as part of the acquisition and when we were purchased. And it was something we brought along in terms of, hey, there are quicker ways to do this, right? It doesn't need to have so much red tape as banks traditionally have. And so I think that was a big moment for us in terms of trying to preserve that culture while also understanding how a huge enterprise, a huge organization works, right? It was really interesting to see that finance was very decentralized, if you will. There was very specific niche functions that was intended to serve a network of businesses. And so it was kind of blending the two cultures together and finding that path forward. So that was kind of one of the big learnings for me as part of that position.
Was there a moment you had to choose between maybe being, analytically right and becoming organizationally effective inside Morgan Stanley?
Yes. A lot of the times we focus very much on the numbers at Morgan Stanley. Sometimes it could feel like, hey, a lot of these decisions were made months ago, years ago, and we're just really executing on the plan. Some of those moments really came when we had to defend our thesis as it related to some of the business units that we had spun up and purchased into. I can remember it was I had to get on a call. I had to request capital for us to continue to fund this UK entity that we had built out with the thesis that we were going to grow in EMEA. And so that was one of the times where I really had to think about the business impact overall and not just rely on numbers. From a numbers perspective, it wasn't a profitable entity, but it was really talking about the opportunity and what was possible. And in order for us to move through that bottleneck, we needed the entity to be adequately funded. So I had to request $100 million from a committee where we effectively defended our position to say this investment is going to be worthwhile and this will pay off tenfold. We'll be able to dominate the UK market as a result, but we need to make sure this is well capitalized up front. And that's where it wasn't just about the numbers in terms of defending your position, but really what our strategy was as it related to kind of our geo expansion there.
Well, great insights there for us. Thank you. Hey, along your path, did it always seem clear to you at the time you were headed on the CFO path? Or were there uncertain times where you made certain trade-offs to make certain you stayed on the path?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm the poster child of doubting myself throughout my career. I don't think I ever thought about becoming a CFO. So I kind of followed the traditional path of getting my designation. Now going to go into industry, see what that's like, and we'll see. We'll see where that takes me. One of those moments were I had a new CFO had come on at Solium, and she was doing interviews with everyone, trying to get an understanding of where you saw yourself, that traditional question of where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? Yep. And I said, I don't know. I like what I'm doing, but I don't think I've hit my ceiling in terms of what I'm capable of and what I can do. And she asked me point blank, well, do you want to take on my role? Do you want to be a CFO one day? And for some reason, that thought had never occurred to me. And in that moment when it did, I was like, I've never thought about that, but I've always doubted myself of being able to have that expertise, that experience, to be a CFO. So that was a really jarring moment for me where I thought, oh, maybe I'm too down on myself of what I'm capable of. Really had to put myself out there and lean forward into some of the fears I had in terms of, just participating and saying yes to specific opportunities and really showing the operator side that I was capable of. So for me, it wasn't something I had always thought about and pursued, but it happened because it was a natural fit in terms of what I really like to do. I feel like I am a natural operator, and I really love to partner with the business and help them bring insights that'll make better decisions and help the organization grow. So that was kind of a little bit into my movement or path to CFO, but really it was just being opportunistic and saying yes when those roles did eventually come up.
But nice overview for us, Amy. Thank you so much for answering our questions. We might have a few more career-related ones a little later, but right now let's find out about Procurify today. What is this company about? Tell us about it.
Yeah, for sure. So before I tell you about Procurify specifically, I think what I'm going to do is just start with the problem we're trying to solve for, because I think that's what really makes Procurify's story really compelling and interesting. So Jack, most mid-market companies, so think about the businesses that are doing anywhere between 25 to 500 million in revenue a year, they are managing their spend in a way that will genuinely surprise you. I fact checked this in terms of my peers, my spouse. He's also running a mid-market company, so very genuine in terms of procurement happening over email. Approvals are in spreadsheets. You literally have POs and invoices that are sitting on someone's inbox. In some organizations, it's actually still on paper and sitting on someone's desk, right? In terms of the manual matching that needs to happen, the oversight that needs to happen. So by the time a finance team, AP team actually sees these numbers, it's way too late for it to be meaningful, for us to do anything about it in terms of being able to control or manage that cost. So the problem that Procurify solves is that's what we're fundamentally trying to do. We're solving for that manual process, that complexity, that siloed approach as it relates to your overall spend management. So we are the leading AI-powered intake to pay solution for the mid-market, and which in plain English means we are connecting that full workflow from your intake or purchasing all the way through to approvals, invoice reconciliation, and lastly, payment off of our platform. That way, most finance leaders, ops leaders, whoever is managing that procurement and payable side of the house, they're able to have that real-time visibility and that control over spend before it actually happens, not after the fact. So I think that's what really sets us apart from those enterprise solutions. We're not trying to be a big complex solution where we've then just squeezed it into that mid-market box. We have been really purpose-built for the mid-market segment. So you can be ultimately, we have customers that are up and running under 6 weeks. So that time to value is significantly different to your traditional software. It doesn't take a year-long implementation. It doesn't take an army of consultants to get it done. So that's the beauty of it. And I think just the last piece on it, what's really interesting, why I love being the CFO of Procurify is I'm also the ICP. I'm the customer. I get to eat my own dog food in terms of being able to leverage this technology and make my day easier. I've lived through all these problems. Even looking back at my time at Morgan Stanley, we used to use a tool called Ariba, and we tried to push something through in terms of we needed engagement done to get tax work done. And we had to utilize Ariba because it was mandated throughout the firm. And we pushed through the request and it took a year, like a year. We had already needed the engagement done and signed off. It took a year for a response to come back in terms of, is this approved or not approved? Ended up being not approved because we missed coding something in specifically, but that's kind of how archaic and outdated some of the enterprise software is today. Whereas Procurify really focuses on that end user experience. It's simple, it's easy to use, but it's covering that full suite need that is a consistent pain point, I would say, in terms of CFOs today.
What can you maybe give us an abbreviated history of the company's history going back in time? Maybe its funding path forward.
Yeah, for sure. So Procurify is a private company. So we were bootstrapped. We were founded back in around 2012, and we had this mission of trying to really solve for these pain points, these procurement nightmares, as we would call them, for real world businesses. We are funded through VC and growth equity. And so we are post Series C now at this point. We are a much larger organization and really focused on that mid-market, as well as AI capabilities. And so, yeah, that's kind of the history and journey. We've really evolved from a product lens, and we really did start out kind of in that intake or procurement side of the house, but really expanded over the full workflow as it relates to purchase to pay.
When it comes to growth, what is really driving outcomes in the business right now?
In terms of growth, I think the big area is for most of our customers, there's point solutions. So they're utilizing point solutions to solve for the bigger problem. They don't have a platform that has all of their data, all of their information. A lot of them are trying to ultimately address the issue at the end of the workflow in terms of the payment side. But when we work with an organization, when we work with a customer, when we think about just their overall flow, it all starts on the purchasing side, right? That decision to make a commitment. How do you allocate that capital, that initial request that comes in? When that's in a very curated flow that works for your business, our customers see value right away. And that's something we're seeing growing immensely. The other aspect we're seeing growing immensely is just our agentic capabilities. So our ability to effectively share spend insights to our customers based off of their purchasing data, being proactive in terms of prompts, flagging things that don't make sense in terms of what their usual flows look like or purchasing behavior looks like. It also drives opportunity for them to review their overall spend and negotiation with vendors to say, hey, you spend a lot of money with this one vendor. And what we're seeing in from a trending perspective is you're paying above market, or there's opportunity here ultimately to renegotiate. So I think more and more our customers are really seeing that value and that seamless workflow and benefiting off of it. And so for us, a lot of it is keeping up with the expansions that our customers are doing in the sense of adding more users, adding more modules in terms of what they're utilizing. But yeah, I would say those are some of the bigger triggers in terms of our growth today.
And what input metrics do you watch most closely each week? And that gives you visibility, I guess, into whether you're achieving the outcomes you want.
Yeah, so a big one for us is product usage. So we go deep in terms of understanding how our product is being utilized by our customers. Something that we review or manage as an overarching item that we look at is spend under management. So how much of our customer spend is being pushed through our Procurify platform. So it's interesting to see the tie-in with some of the new features and things that we release out to our customer and how quickly adoption then follows. So one of the things that we've done is kind of added an agentic layer to intake in recent months, which allows our customers to ultimately automate intake of certain POs, and it will auto code for you. It'll ingest that invoice or PO. It was crazy to just see the volume increase the moment the feature was released out to our customers. Just how much was being done manually was eye-opening, right? Because that meant someone else was coding this behind the scenes on a daily basis. And so for some customers, we were seeing thousands of uploads on a daily basis. And so those are some of the proactive metrics that we really focus on is this feature, is this product, is it doing what we were intending it to do? And is it really adding value to our customers?
That's a good example for us. We wonder how AI is changing how your finance team operates. What would you share with us?
Yeah, for sure. I think AI has been such a huge disruptor. It's been changing on a weekly, monthly basis. But I think ultimately for my finance team, it's allowed us to do a lot more than what we were able to before. It's given us a lot more visibility over what's happening across the company, and
Hmm.
it's forced us to be less reactive and more proactive. So my team spends a lot of time within our own product, our own platform. I would say before, historically, when I first came into the role, when we talked about kind of our cash flow management, our forecasting, hey, what does the burn look like coming up? The answer was always consistently, hey, we're going to have to wait till the month closes. I'm going to have to be able to generate you a report to tell you what we spent, what the P&L hit was, and then potentially give us an outlook in terms of how that will forecast into our cash flow. So we really flip that in terms of when we actually do that analysis and insight. So we utilize our tool to kind of do a lot of our cash flow planning or capital planning, looking at what is being requested across the organization, looking at what are some of the road spend that ultimately isn't necessarily within budget, and then being able to marry that data using AI and forecasting tools to be able to give me a more accurate reflection of cash flow. And I know it's working because for the first time, I have more than 80% confidence in terms of where we're going to end the cash number at each month. And so that's where it's that mentality shift, and it is a muscle that needs to be built within all finance organization. It's being at the forefront of that process so that you are effectively you have the context, the insights, and are able to then manage your overall forecasting. That's been the big key change. And with automation that AI has been able to bring towards us and the insights it's able to bring, that's helped immensely in terms of, I have a small team, right? Like I can't have one person just constantly doing this. We're able to more effectively use that resourcing and apply their talents towards more value add activity.
If we were to go back in time, I imagine 2 years ago, there were all sorts of ideas floating, as there are today, probably about how AI might change this or that. We're wondering where AI has perhaps been harder to implement than what was expected. And perhaps that's because of governance issues or what have you. Don't know. But what's made AI adoption difficult somewhere, some part of the organization, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it was funny. I was chatting with a team member about this recently, just in terms of, hey, AI has done a lot to really disrupt the team, the the industry, the mandate, I think, for a lot of organization is use AI everywhere. But what does that actually mean? You know, I can't just deploy all these licenses like, hey, give my whole team, everyone has a cloud license and you go at it, right? And you have to be really intentional in terms of what you are trying to do. So for me and for the team, it is really thinking about, outcomes. So what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to ultimately automate or improve a process? If that's the case, I want to make sure there are measurements in place in terms of what is the productivity gain then. So having that tangible layer is really important when you're driving AI adoption and AI outcomes. Separately, is it something that we're trying to change a process on, right? Where we are embedding agents or more AI throughout the process. And that is something we are actively testing and working on as a finance team of moving through our full quote to cash cycle is one of the areas we're really trying to apply AI and agents so that a lot of the administrative, the redundant work is taken care of. And then the areas that do require a lot of judgment or critical judgment, there's still a human intervention layer associated with it. And then lastly, it's really kind of transformational. So I want everyone to lean in. I think one of the things that I've seen across my team, across others that I've talked to is there's that general fear of like, if you don't understand something, if you haven't utilized it before, I'm just gonna, not touch it and pretend it's not happening to me until I get a better sense of it. So for me, I always advocate for my team in terms of we are an AI first organization. It's how we built our product, our platform. It's how our R&D team is ran and organized. So I want that to be reflected throughout the whole organization. And so for them, it is really leaning in and thinking AI first and being able to test out and see what works and doesn't work.
You just said something interesting. R&D is run and organized by AI today. Is that, can you reflect on that a little more for us? How is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at the very start of the year, we were really intentional in terms of, hey, if we're going to be an AI native company, that has to start with how we actually build our product, how we engineer our product.
Right.
And so for us, like even when we look at the software that is being built, we are actively tracking and looking at how much of that is done by agents that are deployed by our engineering resources and how much is still being done manually. And I will say it is very jarring, that switch that has happened over the past 12 months, where I would historically, like it's been predominantly an engineering writing code, developing product and releasing it, whereas now a huge chunk of that, we address tech debt, we address new product features. A huge portion of that is being done through agents that are set up throughout that engineering organization. And so that's been kind of one of the mantras or one of the things that I try to focus my team on of, hey, we want to be just as good as our engineering teams, especially with what's available and the natural language models that are available for us to prompt. I want you guys to be just as good as that and have that forward thinking mindset.
No, great insight there for us. Thank you for sharing that. We are up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment. And this is, of course, where we ask you just to look back in time and share with us a moment of insight you had along the way. Anything come to mind? Amy, something that surprised you, something made you think differently? Anything?
Yeah. So lots of different moments throughout my career, but I think one specifically comes to mind. I think when I look at it thematically, there's many moments that shape me most as a leader. And they all revolve around a single theme. And it was that belief that people with the bigger titles, more credentials, more experience, that they simply knew more than I did. So their judgment was more reliable than mine. And ultimately, my job was to just execute and not to question what was happening. So there was a moment in my career where I can pinpoint that my point of view on this changed completely. So going back to that big deal in terms of a sale of Solium over to Morgan Stanley, it was $1 billion transaction. So as you can imagine, every number, every adjustment, everything was being scrutinized, and not just by me and the team, but by some of like the sharpest minds in terms of finance. We had consultants, we had banks, we had Morgan Stanley, right? So the deal had been worked on for months and months by various teams. And I was working late one night and running some analysis, doing some final checks so that we can wrap up. We were intending to push out the payment to our shareholders and employees on the transaction the next week. So I had come across something weird, something seemed off in terms of just how we had decided to treat something. And so my immediate instinct, to be honest, was, I should dismiss it. There's no way it got missed, not on a deal that was this big, not by these people. So I was definitely wrong. But a part of me, and maybe that's like the stubborn part of my mother that got passed on to me, I couldn't let it go. So I did something that took more nerve than I would care to admit, but I did bring it up with my manager, my boss. But that meant like directly challenging the work that they had done and the decisions that they had made. So I really did have to be right on it. And so I had to communicate it in a way that didn't really come across as like arrogant or accusatory. So it was a delicate line to walk, especially when you're still relatively junior and the stakes are that high. So I was right. We worked through it. I was able to convince them of the error, and we made sure we were able to correct it before some of the final payments went out to our shareholders and employees. Because ultimately, if we had gotten that wrong, that would have been over $1 million we would have shortchanged certain individuals. And so it would have looked awful on our end. But what that moment really taught me was I think it goes far more beyond the mechanics of the deal. For me, it was credentials and titles are really just that. They are often just optics. While they do signal, experience, it's not a guaranteed outcome, right, of accuracy or that we're making the right decisions. So for that, I think your own judgment, your own instincts, your own ability to reason through a problem, I think those are things that are not less valuable because you're earlier in your career. They actually might be your biggest strength and your biggest differentiator. So I do carry that lesson with me in terms of my career, and I do feel like it's more relevant now than ever because when you think about AI disrupting everything around us, right? The playing field has been effectively leveled. Think about the technical skills that once took years to develop, right? Now they're available at everyone's fingertips. So, what AI can't replace though, and I think what will actually separate the great leaders from the rest is that critical judgment. It's that ability for you to be able to reason through that ambiguity, that willingness to trust your gut when everything around you is maybe telling you to stay quiet. So, so that late night in Calgary, questioning that $1 billion deal it seemed was airtight. I think that was a moment I truly learned to trust my own instinct and follow my gut.
Yeah, great moment to share with us. Thank you for that. We're going to jump to what we like to refer to as our mentoring round. And Amy, we wonder about the first time you stepped into the CFO role. We wonder, the first 60 days or 90 days, there was something you didn't expect. You had observed CFOs, you were so familiar with the role, but at the same time, there must have been something you wish you knew. Something, if you could go back in time, you'd tell yourself. What would that be?
Yeah, I think for me, it would be that technical skills get you into the room, but it's not what keeps you there. So I had spent a lot of my energy, especially earlier on in my career, trying to be the smartest person in the room when it came to the numbers or when it came to the finance function. That is fundamentally a trap because as a CFO, your role is ever evolving and the job isn't just to know every single number. It's really being able to ask the right questions in the right moments. It's building the right partnerships. It's having to have that courage to make a call and decision with really imperfect information, which goes against everything that a finance individual is trained to do. So I wish someone had told me that earlier and really getting comfortable with that uncertainty. And so that's something I try to instill within my team every day of, hey, let's just stand back a bit. I think we're missing the forest for the trees here. We're so ingrained in the details that we forget about what is it we're trying to actually accomplish and achieve. And is that level of detail really needed, or is that miss really going to impact how we operate as a business?
Well, we always like to have our guests reflect a little on the personal side. And I really hope we can come back to what you shared at the very beginning, which is your mom influencing you in China and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you share with us your arrival in Canada? I guess you come to Canada. Is that right? As a young girl, or how old are you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we moved to Australia first. My dad did his master's there in forestry, and then we ended up moving to Canada when I was about 10 years old. So that was the first time I landed in Canada. So grew up predominantly in Canada.
As you went along, you had the technical knowledge, you had the answers frequently. You just had to understand how to educate the room about them. Is that a fair, or what would you tell us?
Yeah, I think it's a
You can challenge
combination
it.
of
You
things.
can tell,
Yeah.
no, that wasn't my issue. But,
No, it definitely is. I think that there's all these different competing priorities, or, hey, we can't be too much of this, but then we need to do this. So I think that's for me where a lot of like how my upbringing, or how some of those life experiences really came to impact how I make decisions as it relates to high stakes conversations, ones where I need to get stakeholder buy-in. I think that's a part where, again, growing up in a culture where it's, you keep that to yourself, and only the work that you kind of deliver is a representation of
right.
what you're capable of. I think
Interesting.
like being counterintuitive to that and pushing against that, that was something that I had to really consciously make an effort at
Yes.
as I was evolving in my role, and branching out a lot more. So I think it's really just being able to operate outside the box that oftentimes people put you in, and knowing that you are capable of much more than that.
Was there a time where you were tapped on the shoulder by whoever to present to a larger group for the first time and share whether it was your findings, your analysis? I mean, is that where you began to be challenged to better communicate, how you came up with these findings or this analysis?
Yeah, it was a lot of these learnings were very much real time. I've had a lot of great mentors and supporters within the companies I've worked at where they've tapped my shoulder to say, hey, Amy, really think you're ready for this. The first one was when I needed to join and present at the audit committee. It was my first time presenting at something so big, what I thought was big at the moment. And so I learned on the fly. I think the biggest part where I could lean on was the fact that I said yes and took on the opportunity. While it didn't go flawlessly in terms of my first audit committee meeting, but I took a lot of learning from it, because when you get to have that hands-on experience, that exposure, when you do things that you fear the most, that's when you become much better, and that's where you see the most growth in terms of yourself. And so that's a part where I always try to push myself to do things that I don't like doing,
Yeah.
or I'm scared to do. I think that's where I've learned the most throughout my career.
Nice. Thank you for that. What about a book or a resource for us? Would you have anything you can recommend, something that's influenced your thinking, or maybe it's an interest that you have, something you like to escape with? Anything, a
Yeah.
book or a resource? Yeah.
Yeah, so early on in my career, someone had recommended a book to me. It's called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. So I would recommend it to everyone, not just women in finance. Her story really resonated with me. She talks a lot in terms about honesty about self-doubt, that tendency to hold yourself back before anyone else even gets that chance to. So she calls it not sitting at the table. And so that's where I recognize myself in it immediately. It really validated some of my feelings and experiences. So there's always that natural instinct to wait until you're more ready, you're more senior, you're more certain about something before you speak up or take up that space. But truth is, no one's ever really fully ready. So that's something I really recommend to a lot of my peers as well as budding finance leaders within my organization. It is really that ability to lean in.
Nice. Thank you for that. We're up to our final question, and this is where we just ask you to look forward for the coming 12 months. We'd like to know what your priorities are as CFO of Procurify.
Yeah, so I think it's a very fun and interesting environment we're in terms of just the disruption and changes that are happening within finance. So I think three things are my top priorities. Number one is really continuing evolving that finance function to use AI. So not really just as a novelty or day-to-day or experimentation, but actually being able to provide measurable outcomes in terms of AI usage. And so that means less time on the manual work and more time on decisions that are going to move the needle for the business. Second, I want to make sure that we do have the right data infrastructure to be able to give the business real-time visibility. That has been one of the fundamentals or challenges as we live and breathe in an age of things accelerating and moving with agents and AI, encapsulating a lot of our day-to-day. That the vulnerability or where the gap exists today is ultimately the data infrastructure. What is the context that you're providing these systems to work on? And the last piece is really continuing to invest in my team. So the CFO role is ever evolving and changing. And so I just want to make sure the people around me, the team around me are growing into that change and not just being reactive to it.
Amy Wang, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack.